Hello everybody, welcome to Stonx Music. My name's Ollie and today we're going to be having a look at Multiband Dynamics in this deep dive session. Let's go! Right, here we are back in the Ableton Manual. We've got a bit of a long one today, so let's just crack right into it. The Multiband Dynamics device is a flexible tool for modifying the dynamic range of audio material. Designed primarily as a mastering processor, Multiband Dynamics allows for upward and downward compression and expansion of up to 3 independent frequency bands, with adjustable crossover points and envelope controls for each band. Each frequency range has both the upper and lower threshold, allowing for 2 types of dynamic processing to be used simultaneously per band. Dynamic processing theory. To understand how to use the Multiband Dynamic device, it helps to understand the 4 different methods of manipulating dynamics. When we use the term compression, we're typically talking about lowering the level of signals that exceed a threshold. This is how Live's compressor works, and more accurately called downward compression, because it pushes loud signals down, thus reducing the dynamic range. But it is also possible to reduce a signal's dynamic range by raising the levels of signals that are below a certain threshold. This much less common form of compression is called upward compression. As you can see from this diagram, employing either type of compression results in a signal with a smaller dynamic range than the original. So here we have the original dynamic range, downward compression cutting off those loudest things, and here the original dynamic range, upward compression bringing up the quietest things. The opposite of compression is expansion. A typical expander lowers the levels of signals that are below a threshold. This is how Live's gate works, and more accurately called downward expansion because it pushes quieter signals down, thus increasing the dynamic range. It is also possible to increase a signal's dynamic range by raising the levels of signals that are above a threshold. Like upward compression, this technique is known as upward expansion and is much less common. This diagram shows that either type of expansion results in a signal with a larger dynamic range. So here you have the original dynamic range, downward expansion, original dynamic range, upward expansion. To summarize, downward compression, which is common, makes the loud signals quieter. Upward compression, which is uncommon, makes the quiet signals louder. Downward expansion, which is more common, makes the quiet signals quieter. Upward expansion makes the loud signals louder. The Multiband Dynamic device allows for all of these types of processing. In fact, because the device allows for incoming audio to be divided into 3 frequency bands, and each band has both upper and lower thresholds, a single instance of Multiband Dynamics can provide 6 types of dynamic processing simultaneously. Interface and controls. The high and low buttons toggle the high and low bands on or off. With both bands off, the device functions as a single band effect. In this case, only the mid control affects the incoming signal. The frequency sliders below the high and low buttons adjust the crossover that defines the frequency ranges for each band. If the low frequency is set to 500 Hz and the high frequency set to 2000 Hz, then the low band goes from 0 to 500, the mid band from 500 to 2000, and the highest band from 2000 up to whatever your sound card sample rate supports. Each band has an activator and solo buttons. With the activator button disabled for a given band, its compression or expansion and gain controls are bypassed. Soloing a band mutes the others. The input knob boosts or attenuates the level of each band before it undergoes dynamic processing, while the output knob to the right of the display adjusts the levels of the bands after processing. The display area provides a way of both visualizing your dynamic processing and adjusting the relevant compression and expansion behavior. For each band, the output level is represented by large bars, while the input level before processing is represented by small bars. With no processing applied, the input meters will be aligned with the top of the output meters. The scaling along the bottom of the display shows decibels. As you adjust the gain or dynamic processing for a band, you can see how its output changes in comparison to its input. As you move your mouse over the display, the cursors will change to a bracket as it passes over the edges of the blocks on the left or right side. These blocks represent the signal levels under the below and over the above thresholds respectively. Dragging left or right on the edges of these blocks adjusts to the threshold level. Holding down Control PC, Command Mac while dragging a threshold will adjust the same threshold for all bands. Hold down Alt PC or Alt Mac to simultaneously adjust the above and below thresholds for a single band. Holding down Shift while dragging left or right allows you to adjust the threshold of a single band at a finer resolution. As you mouse over the middle of the block, the cursor will change to an up-down arrow. Click and drag up or down to make the signal within the selected volume range louder or quieter. Holding down Control PC, Command Mac while dragging up or down will adjust the volume of the same blocks for all bands. Holding down Alt will simultaneously adjust the above and below volumes for a single band. And holding down Shift while dragging up or down allows you to adjust the volume of a single band at a finer resolution. Double-clicking within the region resets the volume to its default. In technical terms, lowering the volume in the block above the above threshold applies downward compression, while raising it applies upward compression. Likewise, lowering the volume in the block below the below threshold applies downward expansion, while raising it applies upward compression. In all cases, you are adjusting the ratio of the compressor or expander. The threshold and ratios of all bands can also be adjusted via the column to the right of the display. The T, B and A buttons at the bottom right of the display area toggle between displaying the time, attack and release, below, threshold and ratio, and above, threshold and ratio for each band. For the above thresholds, attack defines how long it takes to reach a maximum compression or expansion once a signal exceeds the threshold, while release sets how long it takes for the device to return to normal operation after a signal falls below the threshold. For below thresholds, attack defines how long it takes to reach maximum compression or expansion once a signal drops below the threshold, while release sets how long it takes for the device to return to normal operation after the signal goes above the threshold. With softly enabled, compression or expansion begins gradually as the threshold is approached. The RMS peak switch also affects how quickly Multiband Dynamics responds to level changes. With peak selected, the device reacts to short peaks within a signal. RMS mode causes it to be less sensitive to very short peaks and to begin processing only when the incoming level has crossed the threshold for a slightly longer time. The global output knob adjusts the overall output gain of the device. Time control scales the durations of all of the attack and release controls. This allows you to maintain the same relative envelope times but make them all faster or slower by the same amount. The amount knob adjusts the intensity of the compression or expansion applied to all bands. At 0%, each compressor or expander has an effective ratio of 1, meaning that it has no effect on the signal. Sidechain parameters. Normally, the signal being processed and the input source that triggers the device are the same signal. But by using sidechain, it's possible to apply dynamic processing to a signal based on the level of another signal, or a specific frequency component. To access the sidechain parameters, unfold the Multiband Dynamics window by toggling the down arrow button in its title bar. Enabling the sidechain button allows you to select any of Live's internal routing points from the choosers below. This causes the selected source to act as the device's trigger, instead of the signal that's actually being processed. The gain knob adjusts the level of the external sidechain's input, while the dry-wet knob allows you to use a combination of sidechain and original signal as the trigger. With dry-wet set at 100%, the device is triggered entirely by the sidechain source. At 0%, the sidechain is effectively bypassed. Note that increasing the gain does not increase the volume of the source signal in the mix. The sidechain audio is only a trigger for the device and is never actually heard. The headphone button allows you to listen to only the sidechain input, bypassing the device's output. Since the sidechain audio isn't fed to the output and is only a trigger for the device, this temporary listening option can make it much easier to set sidechain parameters and hear what's actually making the device work. Multiband Dynamic tips. Multiband Dynamics is a feature-rich and powerful device, capable of up to 6 independent types of simultaneous processing. Because of this, getting started can be a little bit intimidating. Here are some real-world applications to give you some ideas. Basic multiband compression. By using only the upper thresholds, Multiband Dynamics can be used as a traditional downward compressor. Adjust the crossover points to suit your audio material, then apply downward compression by dragging down in the upper blocks in the display or by setting the numerical ratios to values greater than 1. De-essing. To remove harshness caused by overly loud high-frequency content, try enabling only the upper band and setting its crossover frequency to around 5 kHz. Then gradually adjust the threshold and ratio to apply subtle downward compression. It may help to solo the band to more easily hear the results of your adjustments. Generally, de-essing works best with fairly fast attack and release times. Uncompression. Mastering engineers are often asked to perform miracles, like adding punch and energy to a mix that has already been heavily compressed, and thus has almost no remaining transients. Most of the time, these mixes have also been heavily maximized, meaning that they also have no remaining headroom. Luckily, upward expansion can sometimes help add a little bit of life back to such overly squashed material. To do this, turn down the input knob to provide some additional headroom, adjust the above thresholds for the bands so that they are below the highest peaks, add a small amount of upward expansion to each band. Be careful, excessive upward expansion can make transients very loud. Carefully adjust the attack and release times for each band. Note that unlike in typical downward compression, very fast attack times will increase the impact of transients, while slower times may result in a more muffled sound. Note, adding a maximizer or limiter to boost gain after you've returned some peaks to your material may simply destroy them again. Okay, so there's a lot to go through here. I'm going to jump into Ableton, show you a few things I do. Let's have a little look and see what we can see. Right, so here we are back in Ableton. The first thing I want to have a look at is nothing even to do with compression, but I use the multiband dynamics in all of my tracks to help separate the frequencies. I find this much more transparent than autofilter or EQ. So in my bass folder here, which homes all of my massive nasty neuro basses, dubstep, drum and bass and all of that, I have this multiband with the high turned off and the mid soloed and my low set to 120 Hertz. So what this is doing is getting rid of everything below 120 Hertz in my bass folder. Then down here in my sub track, I have the same multiband dynamics, and I could turn high off again, that doesn't really make a difference. Low down here is soloed. So now it's exactly the same as the one above, 120 Hertz, 120 Hertz. So where this comes in really handy, if I grab one of my massive bass noises, which are just really horrible, when I'm designing basses, I don't worry about the frequencies at all. Most of the time I make my basses with the sub bass in there and then go and cut it out again at the end. So let me grab this down here, get my headphones on. So this bass is going to sound nice, big and fat, and if I grab a span we can actually have a quick look at it. Right, so here's this bass. Turn the warp mode off. So we see all of that noise down here, right? Let me drag it up into my bass channel. That same sound. I'll leave it there and drag it here. And then if I take this span and drop that up onto my bass group. Now we have a listen. So you can see here all of that sub below 120 has been cut off. Let's come back down to the other one. So we can see the difference between the two, and that means that I can then write my own subline underneath and not have to worry about conflicting frequencies. Now you might be listening and go, oh, that version sounds a bit thin up here, but that's where we come in and add our other sub back in. So what was this? It was a G. Was it a G? G sharp. We come into here. We add a G sharp back in with the sub bass. The right octave. Let's do it there. So now if I come down to my master channel, open up Span, we listen to this version. It looks more like the original, but I have more control over that sub. I can turn the sub just up or down. I could write some other notes. I could pitch bend it and do whatever it is I want to do. So that's one of the main things on every track I have this set up. My sub bass soloing 120, everything below, and on my main bass channel soloing the mid version of that same EQ, that same compressor. And I just find that's much cleaner and much more transparent than using auto filters or EQs. So that's the first thing that I do with Multiband Dynamics. So most of you guys are probably aware of standard compression, how downward compression works. Click up here if you want to see the original compressor video or the glue compressor video. So I'm going to start here with an operator, and we're just going to do a bit of sine compression and really show what upward compression can be. So let's grab this here. There we go, that's a nice octave, and we're going to grab our Multiband Dynamics. So the first thing to be aware of is soloing each of these bands and setting our frequency points. So let's just solo the high band and hear what comes through. Nothing, because it's a low sub. Let's solo the mid. Oh, there's something kind of coming through. And let's solo the bottom. There's the majority of our thud. So if that's a good way to do this without the sound just continuing. If I do that, there we go. There we go. So you can see here, these are the three bands, our lower, our upper, and this is our audio. So we can move these bands right the way down or up if this band was here, and let's reset it quickly. If the volume was down here, we'd want to move this to catch that frequency. So move it back to where you were. There we go. So let's set our volume to the middle, volume to normal, -12, that's fine. Let's set it to 0. We want to move this to catch the audio, and then upwards expansion, you can see this yellow line here, and then the audio is being expanded up, or downwards, you can see it's being pushed out of that box. So the visual representation is really quite useful here. So let's have a listen and see what we can do. You can hear that really pulling out some of that air and movement, and you can hear that squashing down. So let's just go on a crushing mission so we can really hear what's going on. So down here, same thing. How low or how high do you want to be doing this? Now on that single sine, that's really not making much difference. So let's bring this down some more. And here around there, it's like crushing all of that air. Cool. We've got our mid next. Solo just that. You can't really hear any of that, right? So let's go here and let's push it up. Let's catch just these bottom bits and push it. So we can really accentuate them. So let's have a listen now. And that clip is coming because of how much it's compressing. So before, after. So we're expanding the highest points of the low, and we're expanding the lowest points of the mids. So this is a great one for really making some crushy, nasty neuro bass. We've got so much content here. If I grab this span again, you can see what we've done. Oh, turn Sonar works off for you guys, sorry. Let's open up this span. So before, after. So the majority of what is added is just volume, but it's also given us these extra kind of little harmonics up here. So you can really see where it's boosted them up. So from here, you might want to turn the output down a bit if you want some more control, but because it's compressor, we can just keep that fully slammed. And I've done this in some other videos already, but we're just going to get some auto filters. Set them to notch mode, change clean to OSR, put a bit of drive, and we can either draw this in ourselves or use Max. I tend to use Max for its shaper, but let's just draw something. I suppose we can do this now. Dun, 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 boom, boom, boom. So we got. So if I look through span, we are redlining a bit, so let's turn the output down a little on here. And that's half the job done, right? Operate a simple sine wave, smash the shiz out of it with a multiband, and start adding some movement back in. So we can do this multiple times. We could get another one and bring it up. OSR, drive, show automation for the frequency. We can do this one slightly different. We could do like this. Start getting some of those real nice broken sound as it's totally being crushed. We could also then, I used glue compressor before for this. It's just a nice easy one to turn the threshold and turn the makeup up. And this is just going to crush what you've done already. But instead of glue compressor, we could use the multiband just as easily. And the one that most people go for this is OTT, which if we have a look at what's actually going on, it's expanding the bottom and compressing the top. I do believe that's right? Yes. Downward and upward. Let me just drag that in again. So this is a real harsh, I know quite a lot of people just love chucking it on, chucking 10 of them on, and some other people just hate the sound of it. But essentially this is doing all 6 versions of processing. It's splitting your bands into 3 different, and it is upward on the bottom, downward on the top. So let's have a listen to before and after with this. And grab our span in just to see what's actually happening. So you can see an insane difference created with the OTT. It really is, it's a thing of taste. Some people like it, some people don't. And when some people use it, I do this myself, I will just duplicate it a bunch of times. And if you if you have a look at it before or after, that's created a real big imbalance of our frequencies, and then it's up to you how you'd want to fix that again. We could go in with an EQ, go EQ8, and kind of carve off some of that high end. Might be a bit much. That's the stuff I love, that super broken stuff. Let's take off this very high here. Now you have a really kind of textured sound out of basically just OTTs. The auto filter's giving it a good bit of movement as well, and the drive on there, but essentially you were just crushing and crushing and crushing with multiband dynamics. So OTT is a good one to show you just how much this can destroy a sound. It can also be used in a more subtle way to kind of sort things out. So let's drag back on at the end here and have a little listen. We can check each band and see what's going on. So if we grab our span and we have a listen, let's say everything under 200, I kind of want to boost that a bit. So let's go 200, and then we can solo just that band, and we can bring this down to catch that and bring it up. Let's have a listen. Go to our mids. Yeah, Quite happy with that. Go to our highs. They could be expanded a bit, I think. Get some of that crisp back. So before and after quickly. That stuff at the end is like my favourite thing, all that kind of aliasing and stuff. So scruple that and just remind ourselves that this is just one sub note. So as soon as you go and do anything down here on the operator, it's going to have exponential kind of results up there. So let's just dip a few of these guys in and fade this in, and let's have a little listen. So there you go, massive sounds, really quite easy to do with multiband dynamics, really just squanching that low end. OTT is just a powerhouse of destruction, really. But be aware, you can't just slap OTT on. You usually have to rebalance again afterwards because it is great at destroying your sounds. So for me, there's some of the main things that I do with multiband. I've said this in other videos before, I'm not really subtle. If you want to use it to kind of rebalance kicks and stuff, that's never the way I go. So the one last thing I do on the end of this, and this is again quite a common one, is using it as a splitter, as I said before. So what I'll do is I'd solo, group this, call this one high, duplicate, and solo the mid, call this one mid, duplicate, and call this one low, and solo the low. So now we have, oh come on, color coordination, high, mid and low, so we can do some separate processing. So I come to my highs here, grab a flanger or a phaser or some kind of stereo movement device. Nice. Come to our mids, grab a saturator, crunch up those mids a bit more. That's nice. What else would we want? Maybe an amp, but run it not that hot. So let's go for like a heavy, but take the dry wet all the way down. And then our lows, not that we should have to, but just to be safe, let's grab a utility and mono the lows, everything under 120. So now as we've done the splitting and done some different processing to each band. Those highs can now be turned down, go -6. And remembering also this is just one note at the moment, you could now go ahead and do whatever it is you wanted to do to this sound. I'd probably resample it out, but I mean we can go ahead and write something if we wanted to. Write a little riff with it. Write a little riff with it if you wanted to do that. Also, if you want it to kind of do some wubby wub stuff, we can just grab our auto filter at the end and start filtering off some of those frequencies. Not if you chuck it on the wrong track, you can't. There we go. So let's grab a max device for this bit so we can actually have some fun. Audio effect, LFO, put you there, map to the frequency, and then we don't want it that high. come to our notes and we'll do... Show the automation here, and we can take that to like quarters to begin with. Twelves. Something like that. So that, again, that's still just using some real simple one sine wave with a little bit of a user made. You can see it's just slightly distorted sine wave FMing into it, and all of this processing with the multiband. I think this, for me, this is what the multiband's all about. Splitting your frequencies to do some separate frequency kind of processing, and using it just to really crush those subs and smash things. Like I say, if you use this for other things, actual mastering and stuff like that, totally doable. I find, for me, this is a sound design tool. It's a real powerful one with the expansion, which is something that not many people really, outside of people who use OTT, it's not a widely talked about thing. This is already a really long video anyway, so I'm not going to go over all the things we can do with multiband. This is the main thing I use it for: frequency splitting and crushing the absolute life out of things to make nasty basses. And to be fair, I'm pretty sure that's all most of you care about anyway, is that. So alright everyone, that'll do it for this episode of Deep Dive. Hopefully you learnt a thing or two about multiband dynamics, and now you can make some wobby wob basses. As always, project files are down there in the description. Don't forget to drop us a like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more of this stuff, and I will catch up with you guys next time. Bye!